and welcome to Focus and Foundations. My name is Tina Kramer, and I am the creator of Simple Learning and the patent pending sound device.
And I'm Kelly Phipps, and I own a company called Empowering Minds, where we work with adults and kids that have any number of learning or social issues that stem from disorientation.
Today, our topic is dyslexia.
Dyslexia. Yeah. It's a
No,
big topic.
yes, and we were discussing the fact that we're coming from a little bit of a different thought process about dyslexia. However, we want to start with that textbook definition. So Kelly, what do you got there?
Absolutely. So I pulled this. It is not a clinical definition, but a definition that's accepted through the International Dyslexia Association. Okay. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties usually result from a deficiency in phonological processing of language, sounds, and letters. It will eventually lead to difficulties in comprehension and increased vocabulary. All right, so that is the definition that is the basis for school's definition of what dyslexia is. Neurological difficulties in accurate fluent word recognition, poor spelling, and decoding.
So when you and I, however, see clients that have dyslexia, or we're helping individuals with dyslexia, our definition is?
Well, our definition really and truly is any reading issue that stems from a disorientation. It is a disorientation that has manifested itself in a reading difficulty. And it may not have to do with reading per se. It really has to do with a literacy difficulty. So reading could be oral reading. It could be reading comprehension. It could look like spelling, which is a piece of reading. It can also look like an individual that reads but doesn't understand, which again goes into that reading comprehension piece. So many pieces of that come together that we would call dyslexia.
Yes. So one of the things that I remember when I started on this journey was learning that we tend to think in 3D. We're perceptually gifted individuals. So we're going to lay a foundation and we're going to keep building on this foundation. But words that have pictures that are associated with them. So if I say tree, house, dog, you've just gotten a very clear picture, and I have as well. Our pictures may be different. However, there's a very clear picture. So we are staying present. We are staying here when we read those words. However, if we come across words that do not have a picture associated with them, so if I would say the, is, there, or were, we tend to not have pictures associated with those words, and that causes a confusion. And then when there's a confusion that occurs, we experience a disorientation. We shoot off into our imagination looking for answers. Now, when I say that, it isn't always, oh, I recognize I don't know that word. Let me go off into my imagination and look for my answer. It's something that happens in split seconds. Here, there's confusion, and then we're not here.
Exactly. And the thing is that when we say a picture, we're thinking of an experience, a 3D experience of that thing or that experience. Again, I have experienced that enough that I have an image in my mind more than the word, because I have met people that I ask, when you think of the word the, what do you see? And in their mind, they say THE. They have a picture, but it's not of a thing. It's not what is a the, because in the end, language is the predecessor to reading. And the purpose of language is to share experience with a community. right? And so we are sharing our thoughts with another person. And when we're talking about real things, right? That there's something
Yeah.
about it, some merit to what so it would be the same thing with reading. But like Tina said, that when you encounter something that you don't recognize, it may be that I can read that word because I have put that letter combination together often enough. It's been hammered into me that I know how to read the word the, but I still don't know what it means. So every time I encounter that word, there's I call it a question mark feeling. And that is the start to my imagination going off. And if my imagination goes off enough, then my ability to apply all the things I've learned with reading goes out the door. So maybe I read the first sentence just fine. I read the word the word and, the word they just fine in that first sentence. But those are high frequency words. And I see them the next sentence. And the next sentence, I read the word and I read they, but I could not read the. And the third sentence, can't read any of them. And I can't decode it by then either. I can't decode the new words that I'm supposed to be decoding because I've just forgotten and I'm jumbled and, we're done.
And then a lot of times our students, because they do experience exactly what you're talking about now, disorientations are as unique as the students and the individuals that we work with. We're identifying trends. But if we're talking to a parent, if we're talking to teachers that do not have this awareness of what dyslexia actually is, they're the ones that will, if it's child, well, you could read it. You could read it when you started. It's the same word. What's wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And then
Right.
that's where you and I want to jump in, and we really want to raise an awareness of what dyslexia is, because words can, so for the individual, if they start to experience a disorientation, the words can squish together, they can move apart. Some of the words may come up off the page. So what they're actually seeing as they're going into this disorientation. I've even had students that I worked with who's very unique. I've had two. They started out reading just fine, but like you said, their tolerance, their ability started to decrease. And then as they moved further into that disorientation, they started to see lights, and they explained to me the page would go totally white to the extent they could not see the letters at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Both of these just happened to be young ladies that I was working with. And so to read in class was terrifying for them, because when they started, they could read, but then the page would start to turn white. Both of these young ladies had never told mom, teacher, anybody. I just happened to be lucky enough that I understood what they were experiencing, and I talked enough for them to say, oh my gosh, Mrs. Kramer, this is what's happening to me. And then you saw all the tears.
Right.
So it's important to recognize how diverse, and then sometimes individuals, that disorientation makes them feel bad. They'll get sick of their stomach, they'll yawn. They have the appearance of getting incredibly tired. They'll yawn and their eyes will start to water. And it's just, for me, so important to raise awareness about what's really going on so oftentimes versus what we think is going on.
Exactly. Exactly. Because the hard thing is sometimes families have a diagnosis. It's kind of like, well, now what? Now what do we do? And when I've worked with, in fact, a recent student, 15 years old, a freshman in high school, it has been on paper recognized by a neuropsychologist since the time she was in 5th grade. So for the last 5 years that she is dyslexic. Okay. And obviously she struggled in some form for a couple of years or more before that, because if it was 5th grade, so she had to have been struggling probably started struggling did all right in kindergarten, Okay, things got a little harder in first grade. Then all of a sudden, what she knew wasn't enough to hold her up. So second grade started going down. Third grade, she's a really smart girl. So she fills in the holes. Never was so bad, never so bad that she was identified for special education, but still struggled, right? So she was able to get this diagnosis of having dyslexia, but then they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. And because she could read. Okay. And so it stops. Well, just because I can read doesn't mean that I don't need to learn more, or that there aren't other things that need to be there to help. All of that piece of it. It was just so sad. So when the family found me, just by happenstance, actually, I mean, it's like the stars aligned, and the mom called me. She said, I had no idea anybody could do anything. I'm like, wow. Well, we definitely can do something. And so we talked about it, went through our time together. And when that individual realized that she had control over what was happening, it was like this lead weight came off of her, right? And she's like, I can do anything. It was pretty cool. Pretty cool.
And it is amazing because we can help. We can look at the specific
Mhm.
symptoms, and there's an answer per the symptoms of the individual, what they're experiencing. So with that young lady, she probably, the amount of work that she was doing to accomplish what she was doing. And then sometimes we have individuals who didn't get into the comprehension because they are working so hard
Right.
to decode the words, to be able to stop the disorientation or cope with the disorientation. So I would have been this child
Mhm.
when I was in school. I can remember a point in time, it would have been a disorientation, but I remember feeling really, really confused and extremely sleepy. And we were doing, back then they were called SRA cards. I don't even know if kids still do
Oh
SRA
yeah, they
cards.
do.
So that was so hard. But I just
That's
remember almost being sick from
Mhm.
having to do that. And then I figured out how to control.
Mhm.
And I could control my disorientations, but I was putting so much pressure on myself. Had you seen me as a little girl then, that was back in second grade, and I would come home in the evenings, and I can remember my mom saying, you're just exhausted. You're absolutely exhausted.
Mhm.
So that's part of my story. Now, for me, in my practice and the work that I do, I'm oftentimes meeting adults that never consider the fact that they even have symptoms related to dyslexia. They're like, well, I can read, but
Mhm. Right, that big but.
I have a hard time remembering. I don't
Mhm.
like to read in front of others.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
always did have trouble with that one word. How do you spell it?
Mhm.
Spelling can be very challenging for adults.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Right. Well, I read a really interesting article, and it has helped me so much, because the thing is, as a teacher and a special ed teacher, all right, so, and I'm dating myself, but I got my degree in the 80s, and at that time we learned about that much about dyslexia. And what I remember learning in my college courses was that dyslexics had a lot of reversals. Well, now as a practitioner, I realize that, that's very few of my middle school, high school, and above students have reversals. Reversals are actually a small part of dyslexia. Okay, more transpositions, flipping things around, that happens a lot more. Or movement does happen. But that being said, so back in the 80s, we didn't learn much about it, and it was not something that you could do anything about, right?
Right.
And over the years, the evolution of reading, and I know that this is a hot topic in the United States for sure, and across the world, but the fact that phonics is necessary, all right? There are some people that naturally learn to read. That happens. And I watch my granddaughter naturally learn to read. But guess what? She can't spell at all. Well, knowing my children and We're a family of dyslexics, ADD, dyslexia, autism. That's our family. Well, wouldn't it make sense that my granddaughter probably has some things going on there? Well, I read this article, all right, that spelling takes more work than reading. So if you're a fast thinker and you can put 2 and 2 together, you can read in context and have just enough knowledge to decode and enough, you have a pretty high threshold for confusion. So you just keep going at it and you're fine. And before you know it, you're flying high. All right. You don't learn those same phonics rules because no one's going bing, bing, bing on you. All right. Even in the best schools. And then turn around and spell. Well, I can't spell at all. It's because you don't know the rules. You don't know the rules because it takes more effort to spell. To spell, you have to hold that information and spit it back out. To read, you just have to be able to recognize. But to spell, you have to hold it and spit it back out. So the 2 things are necessary. And then to understand, right, which is the whole point of reading, okay, to understand, you have to have that mental picture of what you're reading. And if you have all those words that are, maybe they can be sounded out, some of them can, maybe some are what we would call high frequency words, like we see them a lot. Maybe some of them are the kind of words that you're like, it follows so few rules that we would just need to memorize that. That's what, it's funny because different schools call lots of different things sight words, but all of those things could be considered a sight word. Okay. All of those words, if there is no picture for them, they cause a lot of lack of comprehension, lots of blanks in our mind and lots of area that we have to fill in for ourselves. And if you fill it in the blank yourself, what's the likelihood of you choosing the wrong thing to fill it with? If I have a low threshold for confusion, and that's the other piece that is totally a part of an individual who has a struggle, that's dyslexic and has a struggle, because I have to tell you, there are a number of dyslexic individuals that find that they do not have a struggle. They think 3-dimensionally, or they think from a sensory standpoint. They can go into their imagination and they can bring themselves back and they move through. Or when we do a correction, we can allow them to do that and meaning so that their struggles are lessened quite a bit. But if you have a lower threshold for confusion, the minute you're confused, you're setting yourself up for a shutdown. Or, it's like if I tripped on a stone, what's the likelihood of me to fall on my face in 2 more steps? It's highly likely that I will fall. So,
and for the people that are listening to us, please, 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 when you're introducing sight words, you're talking to your child about sight words, do not go, these are the easy ones. Don't say that.
No. But what you can do is look it up in the dictionary. Do you know what this word means? Do you know what this word means? Yeah, like the word see. What does the word see mean? Well, it means to look with my eyes or look. How many of us taught the word look by L-O-O-K, right? I'm looking. And now, I recognize that. Well, the whole idea of sight words is to have a group of words at our ready knowledge that I can pull out quickly. And they're the words that we see often in our reading. So we want to know them by sight. The problem with that term sight word is that it has been used to mean a number of things. It could be those words that we want to know quickly. Okay. It could be those words that are phonetically weird, like if, not if, of. Okay, of is phonetically weird. F should not say v, right? But it does in that situation. And so they're not always easy, but sometimes they are. And the hard thing is we train these kids that can read them, okay, but they don't understand them at all. So reading without comprehension is pointless, right? But reading without the rules is also pointless. So the big debate, right? The big struggle is when I learned to read, I honestly don't remember learning phonics. I probably had to have learned some, but I don't remember them. And I remember in college, we had 2 classes that were on reading specifically. One had to do with children's literature, which was more of sight words, which is not a sight word vocabulary, which we know a whole language, it's been really pushed down. And then the other would be learning by phonics, right? There was a big camp back and forth on those 2. And now we're really into the understanding of that there is a science behind reading. Reading is not a natural process, and that we do need to learn the phonics rules that go behind it. And there is a lot of strength behind that. But some kids learn those rules easier than others. And our kids that are dyslexic, yes, they need those rules. But if it's taught in such a way that causes them more confusion, it's making it worse. So the big thing about the big push in literacy instruction, systematic, explicit, okay, language. And so it's a language thing. So we have to be systematic about it. We have to be explicit. We have to point it out, right? And so it's going to be rule based. And then we also have to tie it to the language, because that's the whole point, right? So we have to tie the meaning to it. And really good reading programs will do that. And there's a number of really good reading programs, but they're, again, only as good as the teacher who knows how to use them.
I want to add another little point now. Again, you and I have always been in different states when we're teaching. So I typically would see this in the 3rd grade. So an individual that can think in pictures actually is good at identifying a pattern of words. Up until, and this is changing depending on what state you're in, but for me, where I was, it was up till 3rd grade. The questioning, because we're teaching, so the questioning is a lot simpler, and then the choice of answers will actually use words in the same pattern from the reading.
Mm-hmm.
Those students get really good at, I see the pattern, and they know they understand the sequence and the pattern of the asking of the question and the answering of the question, and never get into the comprehension of understanding.
Right.
And they can get by with that because of how their minds work. We see that serves them actually really well. Until then, after, it was always 3rd grade for me, to where they had to be able to answer a question or pick an answer to a question based on inference, understanding what had been said.
Right.
That's another thing that I always saw. And then that was another symptom,
right,
to where you actually have an individual that does have dyslexia, and they figure out how to use their dyslexia, their recognition of the pictures, to find the answer, but then the inferring, and then they start to have trouble.
Right, right. Well, it's always been interesting to me as a special ed teacher that somehow we would provide, we would be watching kids struggle, but we couldn't actually identify them as having a reading disability or a learning disability until 3rd grade. And then what happens, right, in the special ed world is that everybody starts off the same. And then as we see kids struggle, then a school will apply more instruction, and hopefully they're differentiating it, but they're going to give them more of what's happening to try and help them bring themselves up, right, to the stop. But what I consistently would see a pattern is a student here with the group in kindergarten, by 1st grade, when things get a little more tough, right, then they're down a little bit, but they're holding their own, right? But then when we increase the amount of information that they need to process and the more of the rules and stuff, they go down a little bit more. They're still receiving really good instruction, and they're receiving a response to intervention. So RTI services, so they're receiving intervention, right? But they're still going down. And then everybody's like, well, man, they're not responding to the intervention. That's what RTI stands for, response to intervention. If you're not responding to the intervention, then you must have a learning disability. Okay, so we know, and the big push from families of dyslexics is we know that there are characteristics of a kiddo that's dyslexic that are known when they're in preschool, right? We know this. So if a kiddo has these characteristics, let's start working with them early. Let's intervene early, and maybe we can cause the problem to not appear. That is the goal.
Yes,
right?
Bravo. I'm so glad that you brought this up.
Yeah, we want it to not appear. Yeah.
We can actually, if we include this type of instruction from the beginning, keep it from even appearing.
Right. And if you can meet both needs. So I have a little soapbox. So people that know me know that I get on my soapbox. All right. So I've had lots of experience over my 20 plus, actually 30 plus years of teaching in lots of different ways. All right. Lots of different situations. But in my experience, if you only teach one way, you only serve a certain amount of kids, because we have a group. We always have a group. Now, if I could be individual, I could teach all sorts of just for this little guy. That doesn't happen very often. Most often, you've got the group. But if you only teach in one way, you're only meeting the needs of one certain group. And that's part of the thing, is that we know about 70% of a typical classroom is going to learn linearly and systematically. And they're going to learn by just a few repetitions, right? And then you've got this other group that does not learn naturally, systematically, and they do not learn naturally through just speech. They have to experience it, right? So that group is not going to easily learn this. They need a lot more repetition. They need a lot more, and they need more hands-on. So if we can combine this really great systematic instruction with hands-on learning and do it together, then we've met everybody's needs, or at least 95% of the needs.
And I want to add, Kelly, and this is again my personal belief system, because I was the kid, I got good grades. They didn't understand what I was doing at home. They didn't understand what I was putting myself through to be able to get to that place.
Yeah.
So even in that 70%, I want to suggest there's 30 of that 70 that could benefit from some of this additional work, and it just wouldn't be so hard on them.
Right.
And I think the other thing too is to identify the amount of stress that an individual they're not recognized as having a learning difference. Now, maybe just tendencies for a learning difference, not even a learning difference that would get a formal diagnosis. But I know I would have students that would have to start the year with glasses. Inevitably, they would come in, mom would call, and she'd be like, they're having trouble seeing the board. Can you move them towards the front of the classroom? And I'd say, yes, absolutely. And then I would say, why don't you have them check to see if they need glasses? And in the beginning of the year, they needed glasses. They would go to the eye doctor, they would give them the glasses. Then as they would get acclimated and the stress levels would lower, acclimated to the routine and what was happening in the classroom, all of a sudden they didn't need glasses anymore.
Right.
And everybody would be like, well, how do they need glasses and not need glasses? And this is part of a individual that is not being recognized, that they're dealing with a disorientation, and the disorientation really does affect their eyesight.
Yeah. And their behavior, right?
Yeah.
So there are many, many students that are identified as having attention issues that are actually dyslexic. Okay, their little brains are running so fast that they miss the instruction and they don't know how to slow down. Kiddos that have speech issues, okay, speech and language issues should be an automatic red flag. If you have a child that's not meeting and I would tell all parents of young children, okay, I love our pediatricians, but their specialty is not neuroscience. They're pediatricians. Okay. So I would not wait for the pediatrician to tell me that my child's not speaking clearly. I need to look for models of other typically growing toddlers to see, does my child have enough language at this age, or are they making the sounds they're supposed to be making at this age? And if not, have them screened. It's nothing to screen. Every state has an early childhood program. And we screen our kids to make sure if they've got any struggles, let's get them some early intervention. Early intervention saved my 22-year-old, saved him from a lifetime of speech issues. He has developmental dyspraxia. And oh my goodness, we could not understand him forever. And he would totally be okay with me talking about that. And it's because of his older brother who did not get the intervention because we didn't realize. And I was a special ed teacher, right? But we didn't realize that what was happening with him was actually more than him being stubborn. And so there's so many pieces like that. We need to be looking and helping and finding these things early so we can intervene and help change the direction that these, of the potential direction that a kid might have, the amount of stress that they're under. I'm thinking too, Tina, when you're talking about the amount of stress and what that looks like. How many of our students have anxiety issues? And we're not saying, hello, why? What is it that we might be doing in the school system or in our home system? What might we be doing to making it harder for them? Is that anxiety isn't always, it sometimes is I'm an overload of what the expectations are, or I'm confused and I don't know what to do about it.
Well, and then another thing that we know, if we have a learning difference, 40% of the population that has a learning difference will have an additional learning difference.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very common to have dyslexia and ADHD.
Yes.
Now, as we take a look at, so you and I know how to work with both, and we understand the connections between the two. But let's say that we even have a child that's in the traditional system, and if let's say it's just dyslexia, and the dyslexia is worked with, oftentimes we'll see the other afflicting behavior start to decrease as well, because it's so connected to stress.
Right.
And they're exhibiting behaviors because they're the amount of pressure. I mean, I was this kid, the amount of pressure that they're under. So Kelly and I, a big goal for us is to raise awareness of what's possible, because we can look at specific symptoms and have specific answers. It doesn't have to be this way. And there is so much misunderstanding because of a lack of awareness, a lack of education. So if we have said anything today that offends anybody, that is not our goal in any way, shape, or form.
No, not at all.
Our goal is to get conversations started, raising awareness, being able to talk to each other, because at the end of the day, we all want to help people.
So today's episode is a big one. It's probably one that we need to do more discussion of, but we're hoping to be able to just give you little snippets. That's not a word. Tidbits.
As you follow our podcast, please send us questions. Let us know what you think of what we're doing. What would you like to hear more from us about? Comment, subscribe to our channel, share our channel, because at the end of the day, and you will hear me say this over and over and over, we really do want to help. We want to help families, want to help individuals through raising awareness of what is possible.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.